So if you do not want to be seen, you can turn off your video. And if you're just listening, please keep yourself muted so that we're respectful of people that are talking. And if your connection is breaking up, you can try turning off the video to help improve the quality of the call. And lastly, there's two different views you can use with this call. You can use gallery view, which allows you to see everyone at once, and then there's speaker view, which makes the person who is speaking the largest square on your screen. Now, before we hear from our panelists, I'm going to hand it off to Jael, who's going to introduce herself.
Thank you, Kaylin. Hi, everyone. My name is Jael Polskamp. I am the organizer and co-director for 350 Vermont. I'm also a farmer, a Brussels sprout farmer. For some of you who may have joined the call early, heard me talking about Brussels sprouts. I launched last November the Put Carbon in the Ground campaign, which is really about looking at soil health as a climate change solution. And then just a few months ago, we launched the Be Wild Vermont project, which is our ambitious project of planting 100,000 trees over the next 2 years. Part of this project is really focused on food justice, and we want to plant a lot of fruit trees and nut trees, along with native species trees, to help feed people in our communities. And I feel strongly there is a link between climate change and food justice, and so that's why we decided to have this panel tonight. So thank you everyone for joining.
So now we will transition into our panelists introducing themselves. So let's start off with Hannah from the Intervale Center.
Hey everybody, just to clarify, this is the time that I share my little presentation, or I'm just introducing myself?
This is where you do your little presentation, which introduces yourself in the Intervale Center.
Awesome. So welcome everybody. My name is Hannah Baxter. I use she, her pronouns. I work for the Intervale Center and I manage the gleaning and food rescue program there. I am going to share my screen with you all to kind of walk you through a little presentation illustrating what our work focuses on. Okay. So before we get started, I just want to make sure everyone knows what gleaning is. It's a really old term. It could be traced back to the Old Testament. And I'll let you read the screen, but essentially it's just a really, I like to think of it as a really old form of mutual aid, of farmers recognizing that there's need in the community and letting their neighbors glean the surplus out of their fields so they can feed their families throughout the winter. So what we're doing isn't reinventing the wheel. We're just reapplying this, this good way of sharing the harvest with your neighbors in like a modern lens. So there's many gleaning programs throughout the state. Ours is fairly unique just through our distribution model. From mid-July through the end of October for 16 weeks, we provide at no cost a weekly CSA for income eligible families in and around the Burlington area. And all of the shares are made up of totally gleaned produce. So totally surplus produce that might be a little aesthetically challenged, but still totally beautiful in its own way and very nourishing. And a pillar that really guides our work is providing our members with a really dignified experience while accessing charitable food. And we do that in non-COVID times through like a market style CSA model. So that builds in a lot of choice and provides our members a lot of agency in choosing how they feed themselves and their families. And we can't do this without a lot of our community partners that I'll go into. But before, I just want to share with you all, we do maintain what we call the People's Garden. It's a pick your own garden located right by our campus. So folks, as part of like the pickup experience, you pick up your basket of vegetables, you go down to the garden, you have a really tangible experience. in a green space, and it's just a way for us to make people feel like welcome down by the Intervale in Burlington, and know that they have a place there and that they can have like a nice, hopefully therapeutic experience in the garden and get some beautiful produce out of it as well. So during growing season, we work with these 3 primary farms, some based in the Intervale, some beyond. So Diggers Mirth Collective Farm, Jericho Settlers Farm, as well as Intervale Community Farm, and a handful of others, but those are our 3 consistent weekly gleans. We partner really strongly with the Vermont Food Bank. The Vermont Food Bank has a gleaning organization program based in Chittenden County, and we are very lucky to work really closely with them and to be able to distribute the food they glean through our share. And so it really supplements and provides a variety. And we're also part of the Vermont Gleaning Collective, which is a statewide network of gleaning organizations throughout Vermont. And so it's really great to share resources with them. Through our long-term partnership with dealer.com, they donated this beautiful pickup truck to us last year. So that's provided a really great, just has made our program a lot better. I mean, our own vehicles provided a lot more flexibility in our scheduling. And this year, in kind of response to the pandemic, we started this new pilot program that we're calling the People's Farm. It's like an acre of land. We're growing vegetables specifically to supplement our Fair Share CSA program. So this year we grew just over 13,000 pounds of food. We partnered with Skinny Pancake to participate in their Grow Team program, which is really wonderful. And it created like long-term volunteer opportunities for people to learn more about how to grow food at a larger scale. And it also facilitated a longer-term relationship with the Intervale Center and Skinny Pancake, and unrelated, but we're distributing a lot of meals right now with the Everyone Eats program. So it's been a really great positive experience, and grew a lot of food and distributed it to community members in need. We distribute all throughout town through the Feeding Chittenden, Nut Bombs, a local mutual aid group, as well as a few other agencies downtown. There's obviously environmental and economic effects of food waste. I always like to go over this, how it just blows my mind still that so much food grown in the US doesn't end up on a dinner plate, around 35–40%. So that's just immensely wasteful and creates a ton of methane production if you don't compost. And then also, these are updated numbers from the study done by UVM in June, just indicating the immense need Vermont and the country is right now of accessing food, and the economic struggles the pandemic has burdened us all in. So that's just an overall in our impact. We serve around 220 families. We glean 40 to 60,000 pounds a year. We engage a lot of volunteers, over like around 180, and we distribute food beyond the Intervale as well. And that's just a summary of how we get all the work done. And just wanted to highlight that we were able to continue our distribution model through the use of this open-aired barn, and totally changed around our distribution style, but we were really grateful that to be part of the Intervale Center and have access to such a beautiful restored barn, and to be able to provide a really safe way for people to access their vegetable share this year. And we're gearing up for our second Thanksgiving Fair Share on Monday. We're partnering with Queen City Saints to distribute both turkeys and a whole big bag of vegetables as well. And just wanted to share with you all what we're focusing on in the future. We're hoping to make the program more accessible for people that find it difficult to access their space for one reason or another, and there are many. Making our food, just procuring more food and making it more available, and making sure that it's culturally appropriate, making sure that we are providing the necessary translations for all community members in Burlington to access, and to build coalitions with non-food system oriented community partners to ensure that our whole community is being fed. So that's my little introduction to our work and my contact information. And I'll hand it over to the next speaker.
Thank you, Hannah. So next we can move to Marilyn. You can present next.
I can stop.
Right. So I'll just get in, and this is Marilyn Chiarello from Edible Brattleboro. I'm the founding director, and I'm looking here, screen share. I just have some photos in mine. And now do I just, okay. Edible Brattleboro was inspired by a TED Talk, and we were founded in 2015 with assistance from Post Oil Solutions. Our vision was to enhance the availability of food by establishing edible landscapes all around town, or simply stated, to grow food everywhere for everyone. The vision broadened as we recognized the importance of restoring ecosystems, regenerating soil, and growing resilience by empowering people to grow and prepare healthy food. In our first year, we received this modest 4x8 bed, and we located it in the parking lot, between the parking lot and the Whetstone Brook at the Brattleboro Food Co-op. And we planted our very first Help Yourself garden at that time. And that same year, one of our founding mothers had installed a garden at the Turning Point Recovery Center, which is just a couple of blocks away. And we adopted that as our second downtown Help Yourself garden. We expanded both Help Yourself gardens during the fall of the second year when we offered a sheet mulching workshop and taught this no-dig method of building healthy soil on top of the existing degraded turf. And our gardens just grew and grew. And we began expanding further into the community the next year. Our first Adopt a Garden site was a container garden installed at the Root Social Justice Center. The containers have a wicking setup with a reservoir that reduces the need for frequent watering. This year, we expanded that garden to include a much larger container, one of those IBS containers, cut in half, and then we put some border around it so it looked nice. And it's waist high, and it's very easy for people to harvest if they have trouble bending. We also installed raised beds at Great River Terrace, which is a community that provides housing for chronically homeless and people and those who are in recovery. And we planted fruit trees. Oh, there's our garden again. We planted fruit trees at the elementary schools. And then this year, the need for gardens just exploded as we faced possible food shortages due to the pandemic. So in addition to expanding our existing gardens, we had requests for several other installations. We installed a vertical garden. This is a cattle panel, and it hasn't been planted yet at that point, but we grew peas on that, and it's right outside the library. And we had another vertical garden at Foodworks, which is our local food shelf. And that's passed by a lot of people on the street. And I don't know if you could see them, there's hanging red noodle beans there and tomatoes growing on that one. We have cherry trees on the front lawn of the municipal building, 2 raised beds at NECA, which is the New England Center for Circus Arts, peach trees, and a raised bed at Mountain Home Community, Mountain Home Park, which is a mobile home community. And we continue to work on an ongoing project to transform an apple orchard in West Brattleboro into a model food forest and nursery. And in the fall, people are invited to come and help themselves to the apples. We just ask them to pick one, give one, so we can distribute half of what they collect from these trees. We were invited to use a greenhouse at the Hilltop Montessori campus when the schools were shut down this spring, and we decided to grow tomatoes with the intention of hosting some canning workshops in the fall. And since we couldn't do it indoors, we held that outdoors at the retreat farm. So we've been partnering with a number of different organizations in town, and that all grew out of COVID. A lot of it did, at least. But gardening is not all that we do. We offer free produce at our weekly Share the Harvest stand, which was inspired by a Transition Dummerston program. And we hold that right now garden at Turning Point, and we invite people to harvest from the garden as well when they come to visit the stand. We stock the stand with donations from the farmers market, from local gardeners, and from our public gardens. This year, things were a little bit different with the pandemic, so people weren't allowed to come and help themselves. We had a board with all of the items that we had, and we just distributed. And we were very fortunate to receive a significant amount of produce from the Vermont Foodbank's gleaning program, along with prepared meals from the Everyone Eats program. The number of farmers at the farmers market was really dwindled, and at the end, we only had 2 people who were donating. So we were very grateful to have these other opportunities. During the winter months, we found from the Share the Harvest stand, a lot of times people didn't know what to do with the vegetables that they got because they were not familiar to them. So we started offering samples, and this year, of course, we couldn't do that, but we did that in the past, and we started that a couple of years ago, and here we had our Celebrate Salad event. But in the winter months, we offered free child-friendly cooking experiences at the co-op in the community kitchen there. We've had as many as 25 people show up at these events where we prepared 3-course meals and then sat down to enjoy a delicious dinner. We will resume these gatherings when it's safe to do so. I'm really missing that. That's been a really wonderful experience. Looking forward, we'll be launching a community greenhouse in collaboration with the Retreat Farm. And we have plans to loan small appliances and kitchen equipment through the public library. A longer range vision is to establish a people's kitchen to further our commitment to educating people about the interconnectedness of food, health, soil, and community. And we will continue to improve access to fresh, whole foods, building healthy living soil, and increasing biodiversity and regenerating ecosystems.
Great, thank you, Marilyn. We will move to Zach next, followed by Keely.
Oh, I gotta unshare now. Let me get this out of the way. Oh, where's my screen? Oh, things just move all over the place, don't they? I see. That's PowerPoint. Where's the Zoom? I'm sorry, there it is. Thank you. Okay, how do I unshare? Oh, no.
You're good, Marilyn.
I'm good, thanks. Okay, sorry about that.
It's okay. Thanks for bearing with us, everybody, as we're transitioning here. Let's see. I'm also gonna struggle for a second to figure out how to share. So, oh, where did my presentation go? Sorry, everybody. Marilyn, I'm right there with you. So
I hope it didn't go where mine went. It went somewhere.
That's okay. Give me one second. But I'll start talking and then I'll jump into my presentation in a second. So hi, everybody. My name is Zach Hebert. I'm the community outreaching, title change just happened. Associate Manager of Community Engagement for the Southern region. So the Vermont Food Bank, as many of you probably know, are a statewide organization. And here we go. Can folks see that now?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, great. So the Vermont Food Bank is a statewide organization. And so for my role, I'm the Associate Manager of Community Engagement for Windham County and Bennington counties. There are counterparts who also have my role in the Rutland region and up in Burlington. So overall, the Vermont Food Bank's mission is right there on the screen. We work to gather and share quality food and nurture partnerships so that no one in Vermont will go hungry. When most people think of the Vermont Food Bank, this is probably what a lot of folks think of. Our trucks on the road, our Veggie Van Go distributions, and most recently with COVID, our farm to families distributions that we've been coordinating statewide. Just wanted to highlight that, you know, this is the perception for a lot of folks, and obviously our impact would be only a fraction of what it currently is if our operations team wasn't out there doing what they do every single day. So we're really grateful for them. But I'm actually going to talk a little bit about what our community engagement role looks like for the Vermont Food Bank, because that tends to be a little more behind the scenes. And so for community engagement at the Vermont Food Bank, we like to sort of think of it as a Venn diagram of community partnerships, nutrition education, and agricultural relationships, which cover gleaning and our Vermonters Feeding Vermonters program. So Hannah and I are gleaning colleagues. I'm glad that she got to go before I did and cover a lot of the background around gleaning. So I won't dive into that too much. But our role, since we're a statewide organization, we really try to empower other partner organizations to do their best work. A lot of our role is bouncing between these different kind of buckets of work and trying to have the most impact we can. I also wanted to just take a second to put the Food Bank's diversity, equity, inclusion statement up for folks. You know, I think it's really critical to acknowledge in community engagement work, food justice work, climate justice work, that their, you know, diversity, equity, inclusion is a critical piece of that. And we can't really do this work in a meaningful way without acknowledging a lot of the racial equity work that we have to do. So just wanted to name that and, you know, acknowledge that we are on, you know, traditionally Indigenous people's land and Abenaki land, and really try and honor that in the work that we do. We've got a long ways to go, but we're, you know, taking intentional strides towards that. So just to break down the buckets a little bit further, for nutrition education, what this looks like at the food bank is our VT Fresh program, which is a statewide initiative designed to really help improve food environments for food shelves, meal sites, and other partners that we have. And we try to make this, help the organizations make the space feel welcoming and conducive to healthy food choices. So the pictures here show what we used to do, which are called VT Fresh demos out at direct distributions like Veggie Van Go's and out in the community. Obviously now with COVID, we're not able to do that as much. So we've been trying to focus a lot more on stuff.
Hey, Zach, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I think your slides might be stuck on the first slide for someone. I don't know what your screen's looking like currently.
Telling me that. Here, I'll try to, sorry about that, everybody.
No worries.
I was moving right along. Let's see. Can folks see that okay?
Try going into presenter mode.
It's under view, Zach.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not sure what.
On your on the bottom right, on the very bottom of your screen, it's one of those. Yep, it was one of those. I think it's the one on the far right.
That changed.
Good. Okay, great. Sorry about that, everybody. PowerPoint is not my forte. All right, so are folks on the nutrition education screen with me now?
Yep.
All right, great. So anyway, just to back up a second, that was the Venn diagram that I was referencing, so folks can get their eyes on that and see kind of the buckets of work that we're focusing on in community engagement. And then nutrition education is what I was just talking about. The second bucket of work is sort of our agricultural relationships. So our gleaning program here in Southern Vermont, we have a Windham County gleaning program where we just wrapped up for the season and did around 40,000 pounds of food this year. And we just started piloting a program in Bennington County for gleaning as well. So we're trying to strengthen those relationships for next season. We also have a program called Vermonters Feeding Vermonters, which is where we purchase local Vermont produce from Vermont growers and then redistribute it back through the community. And last year we purchased $300,000 from for Vermont farms in that program.
Zach, can you manually move the slides? They're not moving again.
They're not moving again. Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay.
Can you see them that way?
That one we can see.
Okay, I think I'm just not going to try and go into presenter view then. For some reason it isn't changing with me. So this is the slide I was just referencing. Sorry about that. So our gleaning program and our Vermonters Feeding Vermonters program. And then can people see community partnerships? Great.
Yep,
All
we
right.
can see it.
All right, staying in this then. So, and community partnerships is sort of the last bucket of work that we do around community engagement. And that one is much more amorphous, ever growing, ever emerging. And we're really, the priorities there are working to center voices in marginalized communities within Vermont, supporting our partners, whether they're school, food, or meal sites, trying to develop unique solutions to food access challenges, especially during COVID, and really trying to stretch the boundaries of what it means to have charitable food, in quotations, throughout Vermont. And so similar to what Hannah mentioned earlier, we definitely could not do even a small portion of our work without the amazing partnerships that we have throughout the state. And so I just threw up a couple of local ones here, but there are so many more that we could, list for the entire hour. And really a lot of our work at the food bank in terms of community engagement is trying to advocate and empower those folks to do the work that they know how to do best, and really just kind of let us get out of the way and allow them to run the show. So that is the Vermont Food Bank. That's what we do around community engagement, and I will turn it over. Thanks for bearing with me with all of those technical challenges, everybody.
Great. So whenever you're ready, Keely, you can go.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Can we see my screen? Incredible. Okay, so my name is Keely Agan. I'm a child nutrition specialist at Hungerfree Vermont. And I will read our statement. We work to end the injustice of hunger and malnutrition for all Vermonters. And for those of you not familiar with our organization, I like to describe us as kind of a middleman between all the amazing programs that are happening on the ground level to get food to children and families and Vermonters, and then the state agencies and federal programs that kind of run the food service programs and deal with all the administration of them. So specifically, my work is with child nutrition. We've been working during the pandemic with schools all around Vermont who've received waivers to continue serving free meals to all children 18 and under. And then the other team at Hungerfree is our food security team that works with not necessarily the children all around Vermont, but the older Vermonters and Vermonters that are accessing food. All right. So what meal access looks like right now, because what we focus on as a hunger-free organization is making sure that all Vermonters have access to food. Like I just talked about, school meals are currently acting on a federal waiver that allows them to serve meals to all children 18 and under for free. So school meals are accessible to all children 18 and under. There are open sites all around Vermont where children who aren't even enrolled in school systems are able to go and access these nutritious meals. And it's usually like breakfast, lunch, and sometimes dinner and weekend meals as well. We work really closely with 3 Squares Vermont and making sure that folks are aware that 3 Squares Vermont is available and that it's a program that is really, really helpful, especially during pandemic times. We know we saw this really big uptick in people accessing emergency food programs. And now that a lot of funding is being taken away from these emergency food programs or things are ending, we're really encouraging folks who have their finances have changed due to COVID-19 to apply for 3 Squares Vermont. And actually referencing the study that Hannah mentioned earlier from UVM, they talked about how participation in 3 Squares Vermont has drastically increased since the pandemic, which makes a lot of sense. And also the use of food banks and all of that stuff has risen, and it's disproportionately risen in BIPOC folks in our state and nationally. We work with WIC, Women, Infants, and Children, and we constantly I work specifically with early care providers and families with young children to make sure they are utilizing programs like WIC when necessary, and making sure that folks know that you can actually use WIC in tandem with 3 Squares Vermont. The Farmers to Family food boxes have been a really wonderful resource for so many families around Vermont. For those who don't know, Farmers to Family food boxes were a federal program meant to distribute agricultural products to those in need. And that was due to the pandemic. And this program has actually been extended through December 30th, weirdly, not the 31st, the 30th. So folks can still access those all around Vermont. And another really lovely program that's been happening since COVID-19 is Everyone Eats. And that was a program that uses coronavirus relief funds to support local restaurants and local farmers to provide food for families affected by COVID. So those are some of the things that we're seeing a lot right now and that we're trying to connect Vermonters to, these programs. So again, referencing that UVM study, they found that BIPOC were Black and Indigenous people of color were 4 times as likely to be food insecure because their food insecurity rate was unchanged from March to June. So from March, when the pandemic broke out, food insecurity really spiked. Since March, the food insecurity has actually gone down for white people in Vermont, and it has not changed for Black and Indigenous people of color. In June, people of color were 2.7 times more likely to be using food pantries than white people in Vermont. And we know that people of color report experiencing hunger more often than their white counterparts. The most current UVM study of the impact of COVID-19 on food insecurity in Vermont found that inequities in food security were found in race, they were found in gender. Women were more likely to be food insecure than men, and families with young children were more likely to be food insecure as well. And the researchers that participated in this study really emphasized that Vermont food access programs and organizations should prioritize and tailor food access and food assistance programs to address food acquisition challenges within food insecure subgroups. And basically, especially for Hungerfree Vermont, this really speaks to the fact that organizations that work with food insecurity and hunger really need to put an intentional focus and look through an intentional lens of social and racial justice when we're talking about food security. Hungerfree Vermont, a commitment to ending racial injustice. Again, at Hungerfree Vermont, we believe there's just simply no way that we can discuss food insecurity without also addressing the gross racial injustices within our food system and the environment. We have committed to learning how we as an organization can incorporate racial and climate justice into our everyday work. And we are an organization that advocates food justice for all. It's so integral that we all have the tools to be able to increase food access within every single population and for all Vermonters. And in order to do this, we need to understand the intricacies of systemic racism and how people of color have been oppressed living within our current food system. We know that historically, BIPOC folks have not been given the same opportunities to own land or farm land as their white counterparts. We must readdress distribution of land funds, and grants through a lens of complete and total equity. So that's a little bit about us. And again, I really focused on our racial equity lens right now because that as an organization, we've recognized that the pandemic has really made us and all organizations that work with food insecurity and hunger realize just how big these gaps are. And we are so excited to be making this commitment to ending racial injustice within food insecurity. So please feel free to reach out to us. I know that was a lot of information. My email is up here, my number is here, and you can always look to the Hungerfree Vermont website to find a lot of amazing outreach materials and resources. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we are going to transition into the panel discussion aspect. So each panelist will have approximately 2 minutes to answer each question. We just want to make sure that we're able to move through the questions in a timely manner so that the audience can ask questions as well. I'm going to start off with some questions that we have prepared. And the first question I have for our panelists is, how do you see the relationship between privilege, poverty, and consumption in Vermont's food system? And why don't we start off with Zach?
Sure. Yeah, I think, for me, this is a really great and pretty complex question. There's sort of a new norm, a new privilege around minimalism, around like sustainable food and healthy eating. And there's a lot of, economic and class privileges tied up in those trends that are happening in the food system right now. And so for our work at the food bank, we're always thinking about, how can we be sustainable, but how can we also, provide dignified food and enough food for everyone that we're working with. So, people that we're serving, and especially doing distribution to food pantries and direct distribution to people who are food insecure, they're living through a daily experience of food insecurity and oftentimes financial insecurity. And so their choices are limited, their time is limited, their ability to kind of be more sustainable or purchase the more sustainable product might be limited. And so just really, it's sort of a tension, really trying to think about how to be sustainable and do that in a way that's also affordable for everyone that we're trying to feed is a big challenge. And so I think it's really sort of up to, organizations like us that are a little bit bigger, have a little bit more resources to invest in ways to help people get there. Because it's really hard to do that on your own when you're already struggling in a lot of other ways. So I don't know that I have like a super strong answer, but I think really just trying to recognize that that's a challenge for a lot of people that we're working with and thinking about how to bridge that gap. And so for the food bank, like our Vermonters Feeding Vermonters program is one way that we try and sort of leverage our buying power, our larger scale to purchase from Vermont growers, keep it local, keep it more sustainable, and try and help translate that to folks who might not have the extra funds to do that at the grocery store.
Great, thank you. Next, we will transition over to Marilyn.
Yeah, well, when I think about this question, the cost of fresh, healthy food is often prohibitive for people who do not have the means and are really working from paycheck to paycheck. And so they resort to prepared foods maybe, or foods that come in boxes, or food-like substances, I would call it, because oftentimes they're just loaded with not so healthy ingredients. And to bridge that, of course, the work that the people on this panel are doing is essential. But I also see a major role that the government plays, especially the federal government, in the way they dole out food subsidies rather to big agriculture. And if we were supporting local farmers and making it, so that they could actually truly make a living at what they're doing and provide the kind of ecosystem services as do regenerative farmers do, and really support those farmers and those practices, we might see some change and have those food prices at least come down some. That would make it a little bit more affordable. Of course, we try to encourage people to start growing some things themselves. I don't expect everyone to be growing everything they eat. I don't do that myself. And, the other piece that I just came across this morning, I'm reading this wonderful book by Judith Schwartz, The Reindeer Chronicles. It's a shift in perceptions about what constitutes a thriving economy. And I just want to share this quote from the book. If as a society we recognized other ways to produce wealth than to produce and sell things, if we saw wealth as inherent in a thriving ecosystem, there would be greater impetus to protect and restore land and waterscape, and this will benefit us all. So there is wealth that is connected to thriving ecosystems. And I think when we start seeing that connection, and Judith really, projects that in at least, I only got through like 1.5 chapters so far, but she looks at tales of regeneration and how it impacts across the board, especially economics. And I think that's something we should be focusing on.
Great, thank you, Marilyn. Next, we will hear from Keely.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, my fellow panelists speak my word, and I am going to kind of speak anecdotally because, and again, it's kind of through a lens of COVID, but I think it's because the pandemic has really exacerbated some, of these really hard stories to hear about privilege and poverty and consumption in Vermont and nationwide. But what we found was when we were speaking to people about why they thought that 3 Squares Vermont and other programs like that were not increasing as much as we expected them to at the onset of the pandemic, when so many folks were losing jobs or their finances were changing, and yet folks were really accessing the emergency food systems. We kept hearing the same message over and over, and it was the folks that had never utilized programs like 3 Squares Vermont or SNAP before, who had such stigma, they thought there was such stigma surrounding these programs that they would rather go and wait in these long lines to access food at a drop-off center than even look into applying for a program that they thought that, oh, I can't use that. There's so much stigma around it. And for us, one of the hardest things is trying to dismantle that. And we were chatting with our friends at 211, and they were talking about how the calls that they were getting for food were going up astronomically. I mean, you're talking 94% more calls per month for people who are asking where they can get food than this time last year. And the amount of grown men who had families that were calling in tears, just at not knowing where to go and what to do, because they felt this pressure of, I've been able to take care of my family and raise my family, and all of a sudden I can't. And the stigma of they putting on themselves of not being able to access food anymore, but not feeling like they could turn to these programs that they've been paying into their whole lives, because they were the pride of the privilege that they had come from, or that their brains had kind of put on that situation. That's been really powerful to me to watch during these times. And I think that really does speak to the underlying long-term relationship between privilege and poverty in the food systems in Vermont.
Thank you, Keely. And lastly, we'll hear from Hannah.
Yeah, this was an interesting question because it's all interconnected in so many ways. For me, it ties in so many things of like, I, for a living, redistribute surplus vegetables and redistribute existing resources to people that need it. And this country so badly needs to redistribute wealth, and we so badly need to subsidize smaller to medium-sized farmers to incentivize vegetable production, not commodity crops that will be processed into processed foods, and that makes it cheap. So we're making those unhealthy foods cheap through federal assistance. And these larger systems are at play that it upsets me that, like, at a local scale, we sell Vermont as like a high-end brand so we can export it out to bigger cities, which makes our Vermont products inaccessible to lower income folks and even the farmers that are growing the crops themselves. And it's all just tied up in this capitalist structure that isn't serving everyone. It's serving a very few, like, people at the top. So it's all interconnected, and just want to echo what all fellow panelists had said. It's really great to hear everyone's perspective. But for me, it's the sense of guilt and maybe shame people put onto people for not being able to purchase local or organic. Like, I still have members that like won't accept vegetables if they aren't organic, and I respect that decision. But to me, it's like, you should be eating produce regardless if it's a conventional organic. Like you need that subsistence. So it's also an education issue as well.
Thank you, Hannah. I'm just realizing the time now. Yeah, we have about 11 minutes left, so I do want any audience members to ask any questions they have. So if anyone has a question that they want to ask the panelists, just ask that you put an asterisk in the chat. And if you have a question that you'd like to ask the panelists directly, and if you don't feel comfortable speaking, you can type your question into the chat and I can ask it for you, and we can go in the order that people are typing in the chat. And in the meantime, I'm seeing that there aren't any questions popping up. So I'm going to go ahead and ask the next question that I have. So this is a big question and something that I'm really interested in. So the question I have for you all is, how do you engage within your communities to address environmental racism that persists within climate solutions and our food system? Or alternatively, what do you think needs to be done to address environmental racism? I know this is a large question and there's so many intricacies and you only have 2 minutes to answer, but I think it's really important to even just touch upon this. So does anyone want to start off?
I can start off really quickly. Keely again. So I would say that, again, I have a tiny little story to tell as what came to my mind when I first read this question. Hungerfree Vermont, we've been participating in a lot of webinars from the Farm to School Network, et cetera, that focus on racial injustice within our food system. So I've been able to be listening in on a lot of these panels and hearing from a lot of really wonderful people. And one of the keynote speakers of these panels talked about how we learn as food access folks that our food system is broken, and that because our food system is broken, a lot of people aren't able to access food, it's inequitable, etc. But she's like, the actual next level of thinking there is that in America, our food system's working the exact way it's supposed to be working. It's working the way it was built to work by people who are in places of privilege, who are still in that place of privilege because they built a food system to endure that privilege. And if we try to put all of our energy into fixing our food system to try to make it equitable, we are just going to be wasting a lot of energy because it's not salvageable. It's the working the way it's supposed to work. And so organizations and individuals who are hoping to increase equity in food access and hunger should not be working on fixing the food system, but should be working together through a lens of total equity and working with voices who have been intentionally excluded in the past to rebuild a food system in America to make it the one that would be equitable, where everyone had equitable access to being able to farm their own foods and be producers, and everyone was able to access these foods. And food security is defined as having access to healthy and traditional foods. And that means that folks in Vermont who don't have access to their traditional foods are food insecure. And one of the stories, I don't know if anyone here has ever heard of Junior Iron Chef, but it's a really lovely competition that takes place here in Vermont where school-age children can participate in like a little cooking competition. And she said she was a part of it, and she was like, all of the food that they were telling my team to make was white people food. When I came up with my traditional recipes for my family, they said that recipe wasn't refined enough and would never win the competition. And it's things that are occurring that people don't understand are creating this systemic racism within our food justice system. So as an organization, we are trying to educate people about what environmental racism is, that it exists, and what we need to do to rebuild that food system, or build a new one, rather.
Thank you so much, Keely. Do any of our other panelists have answers for this question?
Yeah, I think Keely covered a lot of what I would emphasize, but just want to add, you know, I've been trying to go to a lot of those webinars and sessions too. And I think it's so critical right now that, especially with COVID, especially with, in some ways, this has sort of made us all pause, reassess, kind of reanalyze the way we do things. And now we have an opportunity almost to really like do things in a truly equitable way. And I think that takes a lot more work than a lot of us are willing to acknowledge and recognize. And so I think trying to figure out ways for organizations to really truly do that, you know, like find the people who are doing the work for BIPOC communities in your local community and actually engage with them, listen to them, resource them. You know, like I was on a webinar last month, and the Susu Healing Collective is a group right here in Brattleboro. They're doing incredible work, and they should totally be leading. You know, like the question was, like, what is the food bank doing to engage communities? The reality is we're not doing all that much. You know, like the best we can do is try and listen to other folks who are actually doing the work. And so that's really where we're at as an organization. And so the best we can do is, you know, we have a lot of financial wealth, a lot of resources. And so how can we leverage that for people who are actually doing the work and support them and doing more of it? And so we've been trying to do that as much as possible. And I think it takes a lot of reckoning for organizations that aren't used to doing that. And I think we all need to sort of support each other and getting a little uncomfortable, stretching our boundaries of what it means to really do this food system work in an equitable way.
Great, thank you. Hannah or Marilyn, did you want to answer this question?
Sure, I'll chime in. Zach, I was going to mention Susu Collaborative. I think they're an amazing organization, and supporting groups like that is really empowering and important for us. Some of the things that we're doing just to have that access and to empower people to start growing some food themselves in some way, shape, or form is by providing the space, the seedlings, the material, education around growing food, and just building that resilience individually, but also communally, and facilitate the formation of more local help yourself gardens, in addition to expanding that into our farming, so that people do have direct access to good, healthy food. And it's a shift. It's a shift because oftentimes people who you know, our food choices and our food preferences are embedded in our from when we're children, from when we're early childhood. And if people have become accustomed to eating a certain way, to make that big shift to a healthier diet, or maybe they're just so accustomed to eating in one way, it will take a lot of time and education. And it's just a matter of working with people and supporting the people to have access to more food.
Thank you, Marilyn. Hannah, did you have a comment?
Sure, yeah, and I also want to make sure we get to Andrea's question too, because that's a good one. But essentially, from wearing my Intervale hat, if nothing else, we're 300 acres of green space in Burlington city limits, and just making sure there's accessible land for people to be in, use, cultivate, and carry on traditions of seed saving, cooking, and all these things that like create a culture. We need to make sure that we give space to that for everyone in our community from all backgrounds. And I think a lot of it is like unlearning our colonial view of the landscape and embracing the indigenous knowledge and land management skills. So yeah, I'll keep it short just so we can move on. But
Thanks. Yeah, I want to make sure that we have a question answered from someone from the audience. So Andrea asked, I'm interested in hearing concrete ideas for how we can move from food charity to food security / food sovereignty. If anyone wants to answer that question. I realize now it's 7:29, but hopefully someone can answer that question.
I can try to take a stab at it. there's so much that needs to happen, and that's something that really motivates me to keep in this work. I think there needs to be like universal health care, so farmers don't have to sacrifice that when they start their own businesses. There needs to be actual accessible, affordable childcare and a livable wage. There needs to be education of growing food as well as cooking with food. There needs to be like incentives for people to come to Vermont and cultivate land, and particularly hopefully incentivizing BIPOC people to reclaim their like historical agricultural roots. And then like institutionalized food systems. Like, why aren't all of our schools, our prisons, our hospitals, why aren't all the food cooked and distributed in those institutions, not all Vermont food? So that's my stab at it.
Thank you so much. I recognize now that it is 7:30 p.m. I don't want to just abruptly end this unless any of our other panelists have any comments for that question.
Yeah, I appreciate that everyone's here, and I did want to. One of my burning questions was, how does your work relate to climate change, and how will your work be impacted by climate change? I mean, we're seeing with the pandemic how the need for food assistance has grown, but looking into the future, we could see a lot more people needing access to food because of climate change. So I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but if anyone wants to take a quick jab at that question.
Real quick from Hungerfree Vermont, a lot of the work we do is working with farmers markets and schools on like farm to school, farm to early care, school to school where you're growing your own garden. And a huge part of that curriculum, even though we're talking about buying local and the impacts of like not buying food that's coming from California and having to take a plane, train, and automobile to get to you, is just teaching children like to be good environmental stewards. And truly, I love working with the youngest learners because you're setting them up to, if you're teaching nutrition, have those healthy habits throughout their entire lives. And if you're getting them in the garden and getting them playing with food and in the environment and learning just outside, you're setting them up to be environmental stewards for the future. And that's a huge part of our work and a huge part of our recognition of climate in the food system.
Great. Does anyone else want to answer that, or should we all?
I can take a really
let you go for the night. It's a great discussion, and I wish we had scheduled.
Jael, I think Zach wanted to answer
one more time.
quickly.
Okay, go ahead, Jack.
Sure. Yeah. So I think, from a food bank perspective, like the reality is we have our Vermonters Feeding Vermonters program, but we in a typical year, we do around 11 million pounds of food of distribution throughout the state of Vermont. This year, we did about 20 million pounds of food. So we purchase a lot from Vermont. We also end up purchasing a lot not from Vermont, and we're always striving towards doing more local purchasing. But the reality is we also have to feed people, and that's always a tension that our organization has to balance. And so as we try to strive more and more towards local purchasing, obviously climate change is a huge factor in that. I don't think it's any secret to a lot of people on this call. Vermont was in a drought for a lot of this past growing season, and so many farms were impacted by that in a lot of different ways. And that not only impacts our ability to purchase, but also affects, like Hannah and I's work around gleaning and food recovery, and the ripple effects just continue to amplify as the circles get wider and wider and as the impact kind of snowballs. And so for us, it's, we can strive towards more local purchasing and reducing our carbon footprint, but until the other things that Hannah was talking about earlier around like universal health care, improving, a living wage for farmers, like really building local and national policies around climate resiliency start to happen, there's only so much all the different organizations can do independently. And so having calls like this, having collaborations throughout the state with a lot of the great people on this call are the way that we can kind of come together and have a bigger collective impact. So yeah, I think advocacy is a huge piece of that work and will continue to grow moving forward.
Great, thank you so much. If that is it for the night, thank you to our 4 panelists and the audience for also engaging in this discussion around food justice and climate justice. And obviously, it does not stop here with the webinar. There's so much that we can do as individuals through volunteering and also just educating ourselves about the historical lens with land access and how that correlates to food justice and climate justice today. So thank you all for calling in and joining, and I hope you all have a great night.